Our first session will provide a panorama view of genetics and updates for your business. To kick us off, we have Peta Bradley, who is the manager of sheep genetics. Peta grew up on a sheep and cropping property in Armatree in central western New South Wales. She's held various roles in the MLA genetics space over the last 5.5 years. In this presentation, Peta's going to be reflecting on all things sheep genetics, including some of the most significant changes to sheep genetics evaluations since their conception, and considering what we will see in 2023 and slightly further into the future. Thank you, Peta.
Thanks, Emma. Striving for genetic progress is something that we've all got in common, and that's why we're all in the room here today as leading breeders. This year is the 34th year of genetic evaluation in Australia, and we at MLA and at the sheep genetics team are really excited to deliver the coming days to you. But I want to pose a question, and that's, what are you going to leap into when you leave this conference? What are you going to take home to implement into your business? And let's challenge the way that we're all currently conducting business and include new developments as they arise, particularly in the genetic space. So what will you adopt at the end of the conference? To get our minds in the right space to consider these challenges, as we're going to hear throughout this jam-packed agenda, my presentation today will cover what have we achieved since that last fully face-to-face conference in Dubbo in 2019? What are we looking at in terms of sheep genetics developments for the next 12 months? And then finally, starting to think about where does the future lie and what areas we'll be working in. So what have we achieved since 2019? First of all, I think it's important to get a snapshot of what were the issues that we were talking about and discussing. What are the trends that we've seen in our evaluations since this point in time? And then finally, what evaluation improvement has come along since 2019? So let's flash back to March 2019, the last full face-to-face leading breeder conference. We're all sitting in Dubbo, and if I'd said something like, I'm going to go and get a rat test, you would have all thought I had a pet rat. The world has changed. We've obviously come through a global pandemic. Some of us have faced some of the most extreme climate conditions that we ever have in our farming careers. But if you were at Leading Breeder, what you would have actually been talking about or seeing is captured in this word cloud that we developed using the Leading Breeder 19 hashtag. So things like reproduction, breeding, efficient, future, they're all key words that we were thinking about then. I wonder what our word cloud will look like coming out of this year's conference. So continuing and thinking back to 2019, what else has changed in our evaluation systems? So this 4-year period has probably been one of the most significant changes in that 34-year history of genetic evaluations in sheep. Compared to 2019, now we have 37% more animals submitted each year into sheep genetics, and this is across all our evaluations. So we're dealing with 37% more animals than what we were then. We've got 39% more flocks over that 4-year period. And to cap it all off, across all our evaluations, even though we've got more animals than ever before, we've been able to make genetic progress. So we've seen a 9% improvement over all our indexes in that time. So what does that mean for when we're crunching the numbers and doing our evaluations every 2 weeks? So this is a snapshot comparing 2019 and the size of our evaluations then to the size of our evaluations now. So you can see the merino evaluation has grown by over 1 million animals in that 4-year period, which is significant growth. But that's also been mimicked in large growth in terminals and also the maternal evaluation. But our largest area of growth in this period, undeniably, is what we have seen in the genomic space. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, we've gone from around 40,000 genotypes included in our fortnightly evaluation for merinos to more than 326,000 as of the last run. Terminals, we've gone from 10 to nearly 90,000, and maternals from 26 to 56. So to put that in terms of percentage, that's a 614% increase, or more genotypes that are used in our fortnightly evaluation. To put that in perspective, for those that attended the hybrid conference in 2021, Clint Gore from AgBoo, who manages our genomic database, did some work to work out how long it would take to print the genomics databases on double-sided pieces of paper. And then we worked out how many pieces of paper that was, how many boxes that was, and ultimately how many road trains we would need to put all the paper in if we were to print our genomics database in 2021. So about halfway during that time period we're looking at. So it was 5 road trains if we were to print our genomics database. Now that's up to 16 road trains in just 2 years. So it's more than doubled, more than tripled in that time. So our evaluations are bigger than what they've been before, but what's actually happening with the quality of the data and the type of data that's being captured? Now this is a graph that I presented in my bleeding breeder presentation at Dubbo in 2019, where we were talking about the importance of welfare and sustainability traits. So on this graph, it's the proportion of merino analysis that's recording breech cover and breech wrinkle. And you can see there it had bounced around and it was about the same level of recording over the previous 5 to 10 years. And it was sitting at about 20% for breech wrinkle there in the yellow and about 16% for breech cover in the green. Where are we at now? That recording of those health and welfare traits has increased dramatically across all our evaluations. But using this example, we're now gone from about 20% to 40% of the merino 2021 drop recorded for breech wrinkle and about just below 30% for breech cover. So we've got more animals and we're also recording more traits on them. Over this 4-year period, we've also seen updates and improvements to our evaluation infrastructure and sheep genetics infrastructure. So I thought I'd call out and highlight some of the key developments in that 4-year period. At the 2019 Leading Breeder Conference, you would have heard both Kim Bunter and Andrew Swan talk about the new component reproduction traits that were just about to be released in 2019 for maternals. Since that time, when we've introduced conception, litter size and ewe rearing ability and rolled them out for maternals and the merino analysis, and we've also in the last 12 months included weaning rate, which is a combination of those traits. So what have we been able to do as a result of having these new tools available? If we look at the genetic progress for weaning rate from the 2016 to 2018 period, we were making progress. We made a 40% improvement in weaning rate for merinos and a 10% improvement for maternals. That increase in merinos was primarily driven by improved recording or just starting to record more reproduction records in those flocks. But since we've had these tools available, we've been able to even improve that further. So we've now seen a 71% increase in the weaning rate breeding value between 2019 and 21 and 40% for maternals. So we've now got better tools to make targeted genetic progress towards this important trait. Thinking of the terminal analysis and back to 2019, in 2019, we had a couple of indexes that were remaining that didn't include eating quality in them or in the objective. And we knew that that was having a negative impact. And this was the genetic trends that we were seeing for IMF on the left-hand side and shear force on the right-hand side. So we'd slowed the decline and it had kind of plateaued out by 2019, but we still had these indexes around that didn't include eating quality. 2019, we released the TCP index, and now all the standard reported indexes for terminals included eating quality. And what we've seen since is those trends turn around. So we've gone from being flat to now actually making improvement for those traits. From a sheep genetics perspective and the infrastructure that we have available to deliver genetics, In August 2020, we saw the rollout of the Sheep Genetics website. And since then, there's been a number of developments, enhancements done during this period. But looking at the stats during the sales season in 2019, before we launched the website, and the number of daily users that we had of the site, and then looking at the same period of time last year, we've seen there's 74% more daily users of the Sheep Genetics website during peak ram selling season. And we've also seen the way that they're using the site change. So we had 44% of those users were accessing the site via their mobile phone previously on the old website. And we wanted to increase that with the development of the new site. So it was targeted, or there was key development focused on making sure we had good mobile functionality. And as a result, we've seen the way people are using the site change. And there's now 55% or a majority of the views coming through mobile phones. One of the other key enhancements or most significant developments that took a huge amount of effort from both Sheep Genetics and AgBoo was the implementation of the new Sheep Genetics database last year. So this involved consolidating our other databases into one single data warehouse that's managed all under the same code. There wasn't any differences between different databases that were previously managed by different people. And I think we're only just starting to realise the benefits of the new database and the opportunities and what that enables for the way we can continue to develop our evaluations going forward. So that's just a snapshot of what has changed in our industry, or the growth in just Sheep Genetics clients, the data that they're recording and how they're accessing that data. But what's really behind that demand that we're seeing? And it comes back to commercial producers that are using breeding values to purchase rams. Now, a key undertaking that we do at MLA is to conduct surveys that look at what percentage of commercial producers use ASBVs to purchase their rams. So back in 2015, there was an Ipsos survey conducted that indicated that was about 30% of people buying rams are using ASBVs. Following the genetics campaign in 2019-2020, we redid that survey, or undertook an updated version of that survey, and we'd seen that number had lifted to 44%. Now this next number is hot off the press. We're in the process of publishing this, but that has, from the recent survey that's been conducted by MLA, that has lifted significantly to now 59.5% of commercial producers that are buying rams are now looking at ASBVs to purchase those rams. So now the people that aren't using ASBVs for the first time are a minority. And I think that's this growth in commercial users, which has been a key target of our genetics campaigns across MLA, has resulted in more commercial producers wanting to use it. And as a result, we're seeing more seed stock producers and that growth in membership and number of animals submitted that we spoke about before. So our evaluations are bigger and better than ever before. So we want to continue to refine and enhance the systems that we're providing. So in this section of the presentation, we'll look at what's in store for the immediate term, what's coming for 2023, before we then turn our focus to future traits. So when we think about the delivery of breeding values and any development that happens to our analysis, we think about our genetic supply chain. So this slide will look at what that supply chain looks like, but I want to start at the end with the users, which is where we drive genetic progress in industry. And that's our sheep breeders and your clients. So that's where we drive genetic progress. If we think about the delivery of breeding values, that's the responsibility and role of Sheep Genetics, so capturing data and then delivering breeding values. Then we have the creation of the engine that actually produces those breeding values. We've got all this data, we've got genomic information. We need an engine that's constantly being updated to be able to handle that amount of information and create breeding values that specifically target an objective. And that's done by AgBoo, the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit, and you'll be hearing from a number of their research scientists throughout the conference. but we want to make sure that that engine is world-class and continues to be at the top of its game. And then finally, we have genetics R&D, so research and development that's happening, and capturing data on new traits. And we'll be hearing about that again throughout the conference. But we need to consider it in the context of this whole pipeline. We're capturing the data. We need to make sure we've got the evaluations that can handle and process that data to create meaningful breeding values. From a sheep genetics perspective, we need to be thinking about how we're going to deliver those breeding values to industry. And then you as seed stock producers and your commercial clients need to be thinking how we use those breeding values as part of our selection decisions. So to delve into the delivery of breeding values, one of the updates for 2023 from a sheep genetics perspective has been the new submission portal, which went live on the 10th of February this year. So currently, it's optional for people to upload their data out of your softwares via the portal. And since that launch, we have seen over 60% of our submissions have come through that portal. We've seen quite good uptake, and I think one of the key reasons behind it is that we now get timely feedback back on that submission that you're putting in. You can see how many animals are in, you can see the exclusions in real time, and that's been a real benefit to those using it. And we're continuing to refine this system over the next 12 months, and it will continue to remain optional, but I'd strongly encourage anyone that hasn't already to have a go and look at that and provide any feedback back to Sheep Genetics, because we want to work with you to make this new system better than ever. Our annual enhancements in terms of the way we calculate breeding values. So this year our enhancements will be rolled out on the 15th of May and the 21st of May for Lampland and Merino Select, or the runs. And there'll be webinars and more material published closer to the date, so keep an eye out for those that'll explain more detail on the different changes that we can expect to see and why they've been done. So the first enhancement that you'll hear about in this session from Andrew Swan is the Merino indexes, and that's been a big undertaking in not just updating the Merino indexes and the assumptions used, but also the software behind it. And that's really going to be important, not just for merino evaluations and indexes, but our maternal and terminal indexes going forward. One of the other updates has been to the merino genetic parameters and adjustment factors. We saw earlier in the presentation that there's a lot more data than what we had before, and we're seeing a lot better recording of fixed effects like birth type, rare type across our merino analysis. And what that's enabled the team at AgBoo to do is look at what are the heritabilities and correlations between age stages, different traits, and update those assumptions and parameters used in the evaluation. And also as a result of our database redevelopment, we've got new age stages. Let's make the most, let's use that data in the best way possible. And then our third and final enhancement will be to the terminal lambing-ease analysis. So for any of the terminal breeders, you'll have known lambing-ease was included in the index last year. The lambing-ease analysis currently doesn't use genomic information, and we have a lot more data. So the team at AgBoo have been working to enhance that analysis so we can bring in new data and new traits and also utilise genomic selection for lambing-ease. So that's the next 12 months, but where does the future lie? And that's really why we have this Leading Breeder Conference, is to get people to consider what's coming up and how does that fit in with your breeding program. So I'll talk briefly on new genetic tools in the toolkit, what ways we have of capturing new data, and how we're going to better use those tools to drive genetic progress in the seed stock and commercial level. So there's a number of different projects happening in the genetics space. So obviously we're working constantly on refining the ASBVs on the far right-hand side. That's the gold standard tool that we have available. But we also have a flock profile tool for merinos, which gives commercial producers a benchmark of where they sit to then allow them to go forward and buy rams with better ASBVs than what they currently have at home. But that's not available for maternals or crossbred types yet, and there's been a real appetite for that. So we currently have projects that are about to get underway where that's the goal, is how do we develop these benchmarking tools for non-merino types? Because that's a real key to driving progress. The other area is developing genomic-only breeding values. There's a large part or audience that we don't capture at the moment, which is people that are breeding their own rams. So bringing in high indexing AI sires, for example, and then using them to breed rams for their own commercial enterprises. They can go down the path of getting ASBVs, but is that necessarily the right tool for those people? So there's been a strong and growing demand for genomic breeding value products that not compete with ASBVs, but complement ASBVs. So getting a within flock ranking from a genotype only, looking at that in a flock profile sense, and where do you then sit across and compared to the rest of industry to then inform ram selection decisions where you drive most of your genetic progress from using ASBVs and buying from sheep genetics clients. We also need to think about new ways of capturing data and new traits that are coming available. So if we come back to our pipeline or genetics pipeline and think about some of the things that we'll be hearing about in detail throughout the conference. So taking, say, sustainability traits, which we have a session tomorrow on, and thinking, how are we going to capture that data? How do we develop an engine that allows us to report breeding values using that data? Then from a sheep genetics perspective, how we deliver those breeding values to industry. And then finally, you as sheep producers considering how you capture data to deliver to drive those breeding values and how those breeding values fit within your production systems. One of the other things we'll hear about later this afternoon is new ways of getting carcass data from industry and abattoirs. So again, we have to take this whole genetics pipeline into consideration and go, well, what does that mean for R&D going forward? What data are we feeding into our evaluations? How do our systems handle this new way of capturing data, and how do we at Sheep Genetics accept that data? And then from you as ram producers, how does your business and the way you capture data change as a result of this new development? So these are all things that we need to be considering as the conference goes on. What does it mean throughout that entire genetics pipeline? And then finally, how will we be using tools better to drive genetic progress? So one of those is the development of new programs. So Bred Well, Fed Well, after 10 years of successful delivery, has just been redeveloped and about to roll out. In your booklets, you'll see a page with information on how to become a host site and the requirements of becoming a host site to host one of the new Bred Well, Fed Well workshops, which is consistent now across sheep, southern beef and northern beef. So how do we have programs to help facilitate the use and better use of breeding values in selection decisions at a commercial level? We also need to think about, do we have the right systems in place? Now this can be everything from a sheep genetics database to your own on-farm systems and ways of recording data, or annual cycles of data capture. And then finally, how do we all work together to drive genetic progress? And from a sheep genetics perspective, how do we help you get the most out of this conference and other events going forward? And anyone, there's a few people in the audience that were part, just before we started, a pilot workshop looking at how we do this better and how do we recognise that we have a great wealth of knowledge in the room and utilise that as best as possible. So in summary, I hope that's got you thinking about what your businesses might evolve and change over the years and over the coming years, and really prompt you to think about, through each of the individual talks that we'll hear today, what does that mean for my business? So in summary, there's more breeders and producers using breeding values than what we have ever seen before. And to tie in with that, our 2023 analysis enhancements had to be about better utilising that data and the systems available. So we've got more data allowing us to do merino indexes and merino genetic parameters, and also the terminal the terminal lambing enhancements, as well as continuing to develop our sheep genetics systems. And then finally, consider how those new traits and tools arising fit within your breeding business. So that's enough from me, and hopefully that has challenged you, and let's get ready to leap into the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, Peter. It's great to take a moment to reflect too on the many, many things that have happened over the last couple of years, both on farm, in industry and at Sheep Genetics. We've got several questions coming through. So the first one we'll go with is the top one. So do you have the percentage of commercial clients buying rams using ASBVs broken down into breed?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but that work and that final number I quoted, the 59.5%, that's just come through an MLA survey. So we're just in the process of publishing that. And that includes, there's a range of other data captured, including by breed and traits and things like that. So that'll be all available in that report, and obviously we'll be distributing that through our Sheep Genetics network. So not off the top of my head, but keep an eye out for it.
We've got one here on some of the website usage stats that you shared. Is there any way of looking at the types of users? So we're talking who's logged in as a breeder versus commercial viewing.
Yeah, so we've actually got some really interesting insights. When we set up and developed the new website, we made sure we built in good Google Analytics functionality. So to look at types of users, what sites are they going to, where they're dropping off as well, and leaving the site. So we've got, and also, by state, country, where they're accessing it. So there's a whole stack of information that we are capturing. I don't have those numbers exactly off the top of my head, but it is something we're beginning to delve into as now we're beginning to refine different components of the website, the results page, the submission portal, also the search. That's going to be really important data to feed into those decisions.
So we've got a question which may come up later in the agenda of the conference as well, but would you like to provide any comment on how far away we are from genomic-only breeding value products?
Yeah, so there's been some preliminary work done. In terms of a project, we did have a project looking to do this come through our National Livestock Genetics Consortium, so NLGC project call at the end of 2021. So we're just working with the people that submitted that project to get that underway, but that's not very, it's not a long 5 or 6 year project. It's quite short term once we get it up and going, and we're already considering with some of the development of our websites and delivering new, things like flock profile that we deliver, how do we incorporate or make sure that the timeline between doing the science work and delivery is shortened, and we've got those considerations in the back of our mind with our other development. So that's hopefully not going to be a hold up. It should be a pretty quick way to turn out a product of research.
We might just take 2 more. So we've got one here on what aspects of growth from 2019 can we still continue to work on within the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thinking back to some of those stats, that was 40% of the merino drop that was recorded for breech wrinkle. Most of the surveys, and Swanee, Andrew Swan will talk about some of the results from the merino survey, but also from an industry perspective, breech wrinkle and mulesing is an important thing playing on most people's mind, and that's 40% of the drop. So I think whilst we've had really good improvement, there's always room to do better. So and it's the same story with reproduction. We still know that there's people that aren't recording it as well. So I think all of those things I put up, they're good news stories, but we can continue to do better. And also the data quality side of things and making sure we're capturing high quality, high value data. A lot of people doing a good job, but we also can do a better job and refine the way we're doing that.
Okay, we'll take one more. So if eating quality has lifted, has the economic trait dropped off?
Great question, because we do know that our eating quality traits are antagonistically correlated with things like lean meat yield. That was probably one thing I should have put up on the graph is we've been able to not only turn those trends around, but lean meat yield has continued to go up at a higher than expected rate based on those indexes. So it's quite a good news story that we've been able to do both and not have to not sacrifice one over the other. And I think that's the power of the selection indexes that are available.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter.